New Waterways would like to acknowledge its partners, the Departments of Water, Planning, West Australian Local Government Association, the Department of Parks and Wildlife, and the Urban Development Institute of Australia, West Australian Division. The New Waterways has actually a partnership agreement with the the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities to help deliver outcomes of the CRC research. And I guess this appropriately is one of those particular projects or programs that we're about to listen to today. So we're very fortunate to actually have Lindsay Beck across with us. Lindsay's based in Melbourne, and so it's great that she's over here at the moment and able to talk to us. Just give you a little bit of information about what we're going to talk about. Transitioning Perth to a water-sensitive city, opportunities provided by the Water Sensitive City Index tool. And a few people here have actually had some exposure to the tool, but Lindsay's going to talk to us about that, and so we all know better. So the Water Sensitive City is articulated by many organisations in Perth as the aspirational target or vision for the future. But how do we know when we've got there? How far do we need to go? And what actions to take to get there the fastest? The CRC for Water Sensitive Cities recently spent 2 years developing and testing a Water Sensitive Cities Index, which allows organisations to benchmark their current performance, prioritise actions for improvement, set targets and track progress towards their goals. Developed in close collaboration with industry partners, this index provides the first practical framework for organising teams, prioritising investment, informing actionable steps for water-sensitive city transitions. This talk will outline the role of benchmarking in operationalising a vision. Using the index as an example, moving from conceptual to the practical, the index is a valuable tool for understanding the local expression of the water-sensitive city and moving towards it. A little bit of background on Lindsay. Lindsay is an engagement strategist who is passionate about getting better outcomes by bringing a people focus to the design and delivery of technical projects. Her company, Lindsay B, provides strategic insight and engagement services to clients such as Melbourne Water, Sydney Water, Water Corporation, Clearwater, Splash Network, local government and others. Lindsay loves interdisciplinary collaboration and gets excited by bringing people together, always with a focus on results. She is a sought-after public speaker and conference presenter, including keynote presentations for Stormwater Victoria and Stormwater New South Wales. Lindsay contributes actively to the water industry in her roles as the Vice President of AWA, or Australian Water Association in Victoria, and the National Committee representative for Victoria for Stormwater Australia. As I said, we've had quite a bit of interaction with Lindsay in developing the index, and Perth is a pilot, I guess, for a transition framework and the index, and it's been great to work with Lindsay. So I would ask Lindsay if she would please to come and address us about the index. Probably go for about 40 minutes talking, and then after that we'll have some questions. Thanks.
Hi everybody, thank you. Thanks Don for that very kind introduction. I love being over in Perth. It's like my home away from home. I've spent a lot of time here working on CRC projects, particularly running the pilot for the index, and it's always nice to see so many familiar faces when I come over. So I really enjoy being here, so thank you a lot for having me. As Don outlined, we're going to be talking today about transitioning to a water-sensitive city and why a benchmarking tool such as the index is an important tool in operationalizing that vision, because it's not just about that sort of fuzzy aspiration, sort of nice to have motherhood statements around what a water-sensitive city is and why that might be useful. We actually need to get down into the nitty-gritty of how we're actually going to deliver that. So that's what this is really about. So I'm going to start with a story. I think everybody has been in that situation. Hold on, I'm just going to make sure this check is working properly. Come on. Here we go. maybe. On. There we go. Can everybody read that? I think we've all been in that situation once in our lives where something seemed like a really good idea in concept, and the execution just absolutely did not go to plan, right? So I think this is a really interesting metaphor for understanding water-sensitive cities, because I think conceptually we can see that they make a lot of sense, but actually it's the execution, it's the how do we actually deliver that where things can go a little bit awry. And the idea of having something like an index to actually guide that transition is a really important part of it so that we don't end up with any regrets. So my talk today is going to cover what is the CRC for water-sensitive cities. Can I have a show of hands who's heard of it? Okay, wow, I'm going to keep that part pretty short. Water-sensitive cities thinking in Perth and the activities that are happening around water-sensitive cities here in Perth. The nature of city transitions, and there's transitions thinking and actually predictable patterns around transitions that we know about from the CRC's research that we'll talk about. Why you'd want to use an index in order to implement, and then some of the other transition tools that the CRC is coming up with in order to facilitate transition. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So obviously, what is the CRC? You guys pretty much already know, but really it exists to help change the way that we build cities in order to really put water in the center of how we conceive of the ways that they can deliver value in a range of ways. We really want cities and towns to be sustainable, productive, resilient, and livable. And really it's about examining water's role in contributing to all of those different outcomes, knowing that it's not the only thing that contributes to them, but how can it fit into that broader picture. Participants in the CRC are broad and diverse. So we've got several partners across a range of different organizations, so local government, not-for-profit, community groups, water utilities, of course, state departments and agencies, companies like mine that are private, so I'm a SME partner of the CRC, because we really see the value of the research, and not just in its pure form, but actually bridging that gap between research and practice and making sure that the outcomes and outputs that are generated are useful in the real world and tangible and practical for practitioners. Here in WA, we've got some fantastic people really involved in the CRC. So the Regional Advisory Panel, or what we call the RAP, is how the regional expression of the CRC's broader work is basically funneled and focused here in WA. So these are some of the participants that sit on the regional RAP here in WA. So you can see there's quite a mix across all of those different types of participants that are really helping to hone the research and make it relevant to the local context here. So what is the CRC's strategic purpose? I mean, really, the purpose of it is to facilitate the transition towards the water-sensitive city. Again, hands up if you guys have seen this slide before. Good, quite a few, excellent. Okay, so I won't, again, spend too much time on this, but this is about the continuum that underpins water-sensitive city transitions. So basically, we know that a water-sensitive city is not something that exists in isolation. It's the result of a progression through a series of stages that cities naturally go through, at least in the early stages. So when we first, people first landed in Perth and said, okay, we're going to set up a city here. What are we going to need? We're going to need some drinking water. We're going to need a quick smart. So that's really where your water supply element comes in. It's really about really need water for potable and consumptive use. And then you've got enough people drinking water, they're going to generate some wastewater, and you've got to do something with that, because if you've got enough of that lying around, that's a big public health problem. It's like, oh, we better get some sewage going on and get that implemented. And then next you start to develop, and you've got impervious surfaces, and you realize that drainage is a really important issue, and you start developing those sides of it. So you can see there's sort of a natural progression that cities go through as they develop. But often cities stop there, after those sort of perception of essential services. And what we've realized over time at the CRC is that that stopping there means that we miss out on a range of benefits as well. That doing things in the sort of old school business as usual is actually really limiting in terms of the environmental and social benefits that we could be getting by doing things in a more collaborative, more integrated way. So the Waterway Fit City, for example, is about looking at the ecological values that can be leveraged as a result of doing our operations differently. Looking at the water cycle city, looking at that sort of closed loop, what's the sustainability impact in a sort of a broader sense around our water cycle and how it works. And then the water sensitive city, you know, thinking about things like intergenerational equity and adaptive infrastructure and climate resilience, and how do those things all fit in, especially the community behaviors and awareness that really underpin that sort of perfect water sensitive city. So it's about understanding that a water sensitive city isn't just living in isolation in its own sake. Every city is somewhere along this continuum and probably in multiple places at once as they move through. So really what we're trying to do is drive this. And you can see in Perth there's actually quite a lot of activity and in broader WA going on around water sensitive cities. One of the key things that was launched in 2015 was the Shaping Perth as a Water Sensitive City vision. And that had a lot of support, obviously, here from the Department of Water and Water Corporation, but really brought together a very broad range of stakeholders to articulate what specifically a water-sensitive city in the Perth context would look like, knowing that in every city, the water-sensitive makeup of it will be slightly different. A water-sensitive Perth is not going to look like a water-sensitive Melbourne or a water-sensitive Sydney or a water-sensitive Jakarta or a water-sensitive London. So what does it look like in the Perth context, and actually bringing together a whole group of people going through a very robust process to come up with that vision. There's obviously the index, which was trialled here. We've just been speaking to the Waterwise Council group over in Department of Water and Water Corp to look at how the Waterwise Council's program can support this type of thinking. So there's just so much work going on. There's a City Transitions Network that's been established. So really the water sensitive city agenda is well and truly alive in WA, and that's a fantastic thing. So how do we actually turn that theory into reality? Okay, if we all agree that this is what we're shooting for, we're all aligned on the journey, what does that journey actually look like? And how do we make sure that we get there without any regrets? So we know that city transitions happen in a range of possible ways. So you can see in that blue line there, that really strong blue line, what we really want is that perfect transition from the current way of doing things moving forward into a water-sensitive city. But of course, we know in reality that's actually not what happens, and this is city transitions thinking that's come out of the CRC recently. So if you look at that red line, right, so one of the ways that transition can happen or not happen is that it sort of starts to get a bit of a groundswell, and then really people decide that it's too hard and the whole thing kind of gets dropped before it really goes anywhere. The next option is the sort of lighter blue option, is that, you know, you start to get a bit of traction, people start to do things, and then realize that, you know what, sort of an incremental change is probably enough, and then anything kind of pushing best practice doesn't really happen. And so you get an improvement, but you start to plateau. And you never really reach the water sensitive city. You're better off than you were, but you never really kind of get there. The green arrow is another kind of a potential transition pathway where you sort of get a bit of momentum, you get a groundswell of support, people start to implement actions, everything is going really well, and then something happens, potentially a change of government, potentially, I don't know, a meteor, who knows. There's some shock in the system and suddenly change in direction, we're dropping all of that, we don't want to know about it. I'm sure that has relevance in your context. So I think these are the potential ways that transitions can fail, and that's one of the things we're really trying to get away from. Without a framework to actually guide you through the steps that bring you forward, how can you have confidence or even know which of these pathways you're taking? So a Water Sensitive Cities Index actually allows us to have some confidence in mapping out that pathway. And it does that in a range of ways. It allows you to benchmark your current city status, so it allows you to actually know where you are in terms of the continuum and your performance against a range of indicators. It allows you to set targets and track progress, so you're actually reporting on steps and actually taking measurable action to move forward and to get a better result. It allows you to model and prioritize management actions, so it allows you to see which things are going to have the most impact and allow you to change your footprint based on things that you could do, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And it allows you to follow comparators to us, so thought we'd show you these ones. Now, of course, if there's anybody here from the city of Subiaco, and I'm not sure there is, but they'll be sitting there having a little fist pump. They're currently the lead in terms of the sort of best results so far. But as you can see, there's quite a grouping around a sort of a really similar stage, including the city of Gold Coast, city of Perth, swan, so there's quite a group. So this is just an example of sort of how it's been going so far. Now, all of these bars are an amalgamation of the scores against the various goal areas. So there are 7 goal areas that make up the index, and I'll show you those in a minute. So in terms of benchmarking performance, there are 2 main ways that you can understand your performance towards a water-sensitive city using the index. One is understanding your performance against that continuum, and the other is your performance against the 7 goals. So as you can see on the left, that is the performance against the continuum. Now, if anybody has an Apple Watch, you may recognize that image, which we have shamelessly ripped off, so don't tell anybody at Apple. And really what that is, it's called a concentric bar graph, and what it does is it shows you the extent to which you've achieved each of the individual city-states. The reason that we don't put you as a dot on a line in terms of the continuum is because it's actually not really correct. Some cities will have elements of a water cycle city or even a water sensitive city, even though they might not have all of them. So what we wanted to be able to do is capture the elements of each of those city-states that a particular city might have without trying to put them in a box and say, okay, well, you don't have all the water sensitive city ones, so you can't have any of that. We needed to recognize the nuance within each of the city-states. So that's what this is meant to represent. So what it does is it actually shows you the extent to which those elements have been satisfied for each particular city. Now, the results I'm showing you are real results. So these are from Metropolitan Perth. So we actually benchmarked Greater Perth as part of our pilot project. And these are the results of that. So that was actually sort of the Greater Perth area. So it included obviously the relevant state agencies and a bunch of council participants. We had about 50 people participate in that benchmarking process. So this is the result. So this is real data. And as you can see, Perth is doing really well. So obviously completely satisfied the 3 sort of baseline states, and then well towards becoming a waterway city, but halfway to becoming a water cycle city, and even elements of the water sensitive city are present. So this is pretty good performance right here. And so I guess the way that the benchmarking is done is it can show you your city-state, sort of how far you've gone, and give you some recognition to the bits that you might have done a bit of, but maybe aren't all the way there yet. The other way that we can show you your results is against the 7 goal areas. So obviously, if you're going to have an index, you have to have a range of criteria that you assess against. And so we divided those into 7 goals with 35 indicators that sit under those goals. Now, I'm not going to sit up and ring 35 indicators because you'll all fall asleep on me. But the 7 goal areas are really important to understand because I think they show the breadth of the index apart from other water benchmarking tools that were out there. The index was developed after studying more than 50 different indices and indicators around water, around the world, from the UN and the US and on all sorts of different places, and anybody that was measuring water-related stuff we had a look at. And it seemed that they were really limited to things like water efficiency and supply and demand issues and cost, whereas actually what we're trying to achieve in a water-sensitive city is far beyond that. And these indicators and goals and the indicators that sit behind them are meant to show that breadth. So we've got things like promoting adaptive infrastructure, improving productivity and resource efficiency, which you might imagine would be expected in a water or urban related system. But we also have things around ensuring good water sensitive governance, improving community capital, equity of essential services, because we can't have large social inequity and call ourselves a water-sensitive city. Things like improving ecological health and quality urban spaces. These are things that are far beyond what are traditionally perceived as water issues. But one of the values of the water-sensitive city framework is that it actually gives us a language and a framework to move beyond that and think about all of the aspects that water touches on in improving cities and livelihoods, rather than just potable use. So when we're benchmarking our performance, this is what we're benchmarking against. And these are the different ways that we can see our progress. So of course we need to track progress. We want to try to improve. It's not just enough to know where we are. The first thing you want to know is where we are, and the next question is, well, where to now? So one of the things that we've done as a result of the tool, and again, this is real data for Perth, is we're actually able to model what the ideal city-state is, or the ideal city footprint is for each of the city-states. So on the bottom there you can see that the city-state for the water cycle city is 100% achieved. And I've got the real Perth data here on the right. And then we've got the model water cycle city, which is the sort of the second last one, the footprint right there. So if you were going to be a perfect water cycle city, that is roughly what your footprint would look like. And so then you can see on the right here what we've done is we've actually been able to overlay the water cycle city results with the city of Perth results. Now what this does is it allows us to see where any key gaps are. So you can see in areas like increasing community capital, improving productivity and resource efficiency, in ecological health, and to some extent quality urban space. Those are the key gaps, I guess, in performance. So one of the beauties of this tool and the ability to see the performance and benchmark in this way is it allows us to prioritize action, right? So of course you're not going to be able to have the budget or the resources or to do something about everything. 35 indicators is a lot of indicators, and there's no way to expect that action on all of those things will be able to be taken in any kind of time efficient or cash efficient way. So being able to see where we're trying to get to, where our performance is at the moment, we're able to look at any key gaps and set targets around what we can actually do, and that's going to make the biggest difference. Does that all make sense? Yeah, good. Excellent. Very good. The next thing that the tool allows us to do is to prioritize actions. And so here, this is, I don't expect you to be able to read this, so don't worry, this is super small, but there is a back end of the tool in terms of functionality, in terms of understanding your potential actions and being able to sort through them and prioritize which ones are going to have the greatest impact in terms of cost and effectiveness. So basically, we've built a back end that we're improving all the time that really allows us to show where our performance is against the different indicators in terms of our scores, what the desired difference is between that and the next city state that we're looking to move towards, and then it allows us to attach some dollar figures based on that, our anticipated rates of change, and it basically goes through a prioritization process that we're able to do. Really, this is all just to say that we're trying to facilitate a platform that allows to assist decision making. It's really about understanding where we're at, knowing that there are going to be certain actions that fill those gaps, and how do we prioritize those actions in terms of their cost and anticipated effectiveness. So this is really, really trying to show. When you become a participant in the CRC and get yourself benchmarked through this process, you actually get access to all this back-end IT platform. So all of this is available on the web. And you just log in and you're able to see your results and work through this back end and manipulate the results in order to see where you want to improve. The other thing is you're able to actually modify your footprint as well, given certain actions. So you can come up with actions, see how they're going to change your indicator profile, and then it actually shows you what your then footprint would be. So it again allows you to show which things are going to have the most impact and allows you to communicate that effectively. Because of course part of this is really about bringing other people on the journey with us, especially our council stakeholders. They've got a lot of people they've got to try to convince to undertake these actions and get funding and try to get things moving. So the more we can empower them with great visualizations and things that help them communicate that message effectively, then the more effective they're going to be able to be in lobbying for these kinds of outcomes, which is of course what we want to empower them to do. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of what we're able to do through this tool is around fostering collaboration. And there's no point in me talking about collaboration, so I'm going to let somebody else do the talking for me. I'm hoping this is going to work, so pardon the IT failure if that does happen. Great, so I don't know if you were able to hear any of that, I hope so. So basically one of the things that we found as a result of this benchmarking process is that by doing it in a collaborative fashion, we're actually really able to break down some of those operational silos that are holding us back from those really integrated outcomes. So for example, when we actually do a benchmarking process, so the benchmarking takes place over one day, and what we do is we get everybody into the room that has operational responsibility in that area, so that includes state government, local government, other stakeholders that might have a stake in the interest. And what we do is we get together and we benchmark collaboratively. We use a live polling system, and it's actually a lot more fun than it sounds. Trust me, 3 hours of benchmarking goes like that. And what we're able to do really is create a space where we talk about the performance in certain areas, and we're actually able to test some of the assumptions and test some of our own ideas around how we're doing. By doing the live polling process and being able to show the different perspectives of performance in the room, we're actually able to break down some of those barriers around assumed knowledge about how we're doing. Oh, everybody knows we're doing this really well, or everybody knows we're doing that really well. That actually very often isn't the case. There's usually quite a breadth. So it's been a fantastic tool to really get people genuinely on the same page about how things are going. It's also a great way to share knowledge and data. I haven't yet had a benchmarking experience, and as you can see, we've done quite a few now, where somebody didn't walk out and say, gosh, I didn't know that we had data on that. So it turns out, because when we do the benchmarking process, we ask people to provide evidence. And a lot of people will have access to evidence or data sets or studies or projects that other people in the room who also work in that same area had no idea about. So the interorganizational knowledge sharing that this process allows for is really effective in that way. And it's been a huge benefit. As Giles pointed out, it's not just about different organizations coming together, it's actually about breaking down the silos within organizations. So, for example, water sensitive city champions often come from parks or environment areas of council that may not have a lot of connection to engineering, particularly planning, and other different forms of infrastructure. So by running a process where your maintenance teams are involved, your planning teams are involved, finance teams, economic development, lots of people are brought in the room that don't traditionally see themselves as water champions, you're actually able to broaden the conversation and really show people where they fit into this bigger picture and those multiple benefits that we're trying to achieve. So there's really that two-sided benefit around collaboration. It's both within organizations but across organizations and allowing them to be more effective. If you want to ask anybody about that, you can talk to Eleanor Chaos, who's in the back of the room there, hands up, who was benchmarked with the city of Swan, and it was fantastic in that process. And I know they've been very active with state government partners that they didn't have as much collaboration with beforehand, and so they really benefited from that. So you can ask Eleanor about that later if you have a minute. So seeing what an index can do in terms of fostering, a transition. I mean, what else is out there? Because obviously an index alone isn't going to be able to get you all the way to transition. What else is out there? So from the CRC point of view, I need to tell you about all the other cool things that we're doing, and I'm going to do that really quickly so you can have some questions if you want. But it's important to understand that the index from the CRC and sort of research point of view is only one part of what's happening. So basically, we've just finished our first tranche of research, and it's had some really important outputs. One of them is the vision, so the visioning methodology, so how do you actually create a vision for a place, and obviously we've done one here in Perth, and that's one tool that's come out of that. The next one is around the Water Sensitive Cities Index, and that's another great tool. So one is around where do we want to get to, the other is sort of how do we operationalize that in a really practical and measurable kind of way. The third one is the transition dynamics framework, so that's all the kind of wild and wonderful ways that city transition can happen in that slide that I showed you. So that comes out of our transition dynamics framework thinking that's already come out of tranche one. And the last one is around community engagement strategies. There's been some fantastic work done around that, including things as simple as what wording do we use to engage communities around water sensitive cities. Shelley and I were having a chat about this the other day. Water sensitive is actually a term that communities don't particularly like. It makes them think they've got a rash. That's not so good. Not really what we want to imply. There's also things around words that we assume that people know the meaning of. I think Angela Dean did some work talking about which words people actually understood and didn't understand, and riparian was the number one word that people have no idea what it means. Of course, if you work in waterland, you probably do, but we forget, that actually this is using our own language to try to communicate with community is actually holding us back from some of the outcomes that we need. And given the score around community connection and water literacy, I mean, it's probably not surprising that we haven't been that effective in engaging community, because the performance in that area is actually pretty low. And not just in Perth, by the way, that is a gap in every single city that we've studied as part of the benchmarking process. So I think we all need to be a lot better at engaging community and being a lot more empathetic and a lot more engaging in the way that we choose to do that. And there's some work that the CRC has done in order to try to inform that. So that's all the good stuff that came out of Tranche 1. So we're now in the middle of Tranche 2. Well, not in the middle, kind of starting into the middle of Tranche 2. And so what are we actually trying to do? We're trying to actually develop a framework to develop transition strategies. So using the tools that we've already got, how can we create transition strategies? And that's something that's happening here in Perth and elsewhere across the country at the moment. We want to refine our methodologies and tools. So we've got some stuff that we've got now that's working pretty well, but we want to try to improve it by using it on ground. And we're trying to improve our knowledge on transition dynamics. Now, the reason that what we're trying to do with that is we want more city transition strategies, and we want to build relationships in order to have that influence as an organization that we're trying to have, and that you guys can have as well. I mean, everybody's trying to move in this direction. We need to generate goodwill and try to influence decision makers to move in this way. And so hopefully these tools will help contribute towards that. And then really the last thing that this is all hoping to move towards is one overarching transitions platform that's actually going to house all these tools. That'll be sort of a one-stop shop for all the things that you need in order to build a water-sensitive city transition in your own city from a range of angles. But so just trying to show that the research that we're doing is trying to move from the more theoretical into the practical at every stage, and that we've got a sort of a fixed outcome that we're working towards in terms of a transitions platform that we're able to offer to industry and really demonstrate the value of the research. So there are case studies that are being used at the moment in terms of honing this work in the way that I mentioned earlier. So obviously there's stuff going on in Perth, here in Brisbane as well, Sydney, regional Victoria, and also in Adelaide. So there's work going on at all these places, and they've been selected due to their mix of scales and contexts. So of course regional versus metro, and obviously broadly across the country. But we're looking at opportunities for impact. So where are there places where we really think that we can make an impact? Is there enough knowledge and support that we can actually really move things along? How ready are stakeholders to participate? And what is the willingness to contribute to research? You know, are people interested in taking on something that's a bit theoretical and giving it a go? Or do people not want to engage until it's all sort of done and dusted? And so you guys are included in this group of pioneers that are really going on this journey with us through the CRC, and that's a fantastic thing. So really the last thing is, as I said, is we're trying to produce this transitions platform. And the purpose is really to support that transitions guidance. We want to have one thing that people can engage with that will help them regardless of which stage they're at. So that will include things like the index benchmarking. It will include things like management actions and tools to prioritize those. It'll include things like monitoring so you can set targets and evaluate management actions and really allow this to be operationalized in a way that is really practical and useful around getting beyond just that sort of aspirational vision and looking at how that actually gets implemented on the ground. So in terms of understanding city transitions, I guess I just wanted to leave you with the idea that, you know, having a vision and understanding the water sensitive city and having a support for it is a good thing, but actually we need some tools and support in order to operationalize that in a practical way, especially the closer to the sort of coalface we really get. It's important to have things that are measurable and trackable that help us track along that desirable curve and let us know if we're starting to move into some of those undesirable transitions pathways. And most of all, you know, it's about having no regrets about going on this journey, and hopefully the tools that we're able to offer as part of the CRC are part of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Now look, we've got quite a bit of time for questions. Does anybody have a question they'd like to forward down? Yes.
So you talked about benchmarking sort of local authorities. benchmark the Greater Perth area, and who's at the table when you do that?
Yeah, so we have benchmarked Greater Perth, so that's the results that we just showed you.
Yeah.
So I can give you a list of exactly all the names of people that we had there, but they're basically the state government representatives, the Department of Planning,
Yeah.
Housing, Water Corp, who else?
With all the people that were on that rap.
That rep
So,
Oh, okay.
was it,
Yeah.
and then some.
so
We had local
UDIA
government
is there
representatives.
too.
Hmm?
So UDIA is a member of the rap as well.
Yeah, UDIA,
So,
so industry representatives, some consultants. So really kind of a broad range of people who operate in this space across Greater Perth. We had invited representatives from councils that were sort of more inner, a bit outer, people who had been involved in the water sensitive journey with us, councils who hadn't. So to try to test the sort of range of views.
And to track it, would you need to redo that exercise?
Yeah, so what you do is we estimate you'd want to do the benchmarking sort of every 3 to 5 years or so. But once you know where you're at, if you're setting targets, hopefully you're keeping track of your actions and their anticipated result in order to kind of have some expectation of where you might be the next time around.
So where are you at now with like commercialising the tool and making it available to other councils to use?
Yeah, great point. So basically what's happening at the moment is we're in an industry validation phase. So there's an opportunity for anybody who wants to run the benchmarking process to do that. But we've only opened that up to a very small group of service providers at the moment, with the intention that we'll open that up to a broader panel of service providers in the future, so that we've got sort of greater access in terms of providers, to make sure that we can meet the demand if it goes crazy and everybody wants to be benchmarked, which would be great. But yes, at the moment it is available for commercial use. There's only a small set of people you can buy it from at the moment, but that's going to change over the next few months.
Can you talk about the key indices that give you your best bang for buck in Greater Perth in terms of transitioning to a more
So which indicators?
city? Yeah.
Oh boy. I think, look, I couldn't tell you that amount of detail like off the cuff, but I think, look, I think if you look back, I'm just going to go this way. If you look back at the at this thing, hold on, come on. Yeah, so I mean, if you look back at this bit here, right? So we're talking about increasing community capital. The elements of increasing community capital are things like water literacy, community connection to water, things like shared ownership and management of water resources, community capacity and preparedness around extreme events. So those are the types of things that are included in that one. And around improving ecological health, things like healthy and biodiverse habitat, protection of areas of high ecological value, groundwater quality, surface water quality and flows. So, stuff that I guess is relevant in those areas. Those are the key indicators around those. Not for Perth in particular, but knowing that those are where the gaps are. Those might be some of the indicators you might want to focus on. Yes.
Some of those seem to be quite nebulous to put your finger on. How the underlying assessments, how firm is that, or is that part of the validation that you're still looking at doing?
Yeah, so we actually have, and this is a great question. So the way that we actually do the benchmarking is we have a description from 1 to 5 around performance of each of these things. So there's obviously a whole lot of content and IP that I haven't, shown you just for the sake of not like blinding you with really, really tiny text. Basically, we have a rating scale that we've developed around each of the 35 indicators that has a description of what a 1 looks like, what a 2 looks like, what a 3, all the way to a 5 for each one. And basically what you do is you select which of those descriptions best matches where you're at. Now, initially, when we first started the prototyping for this, like almost 3 years ago, we had looked at doing quantitative values for each of those indicators. And when we prototyped it with some councils, they're just like, are you out of your cotton picking mind? Like, there's no way that we've got data around all these things. And even if we wanted to have data around all these things, the cost to just fill out the data on this thing would be prohibitive anyway. So from a practical point of view, we had to move a bit away from the quantitative and into the qualitative just to get just to get it to be more operationally useful. But we're pretty confident that in the testing that we've done, we've gotten it to a point where at least you're able to now see where the areas of focus are. And so if you did want to look at some key indicators and conduct some studies around those, you can do it in a way that's targeted and that has meaning rather than trying to do everything. You can sort of get a close enough view of what you might want to be interested in and then commission a study directly around that rather than trying to collect all the information first, which is really not very cost effective. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good.
Fantastic.
Can I add to that as well though? Although you said it was very difficult to quantify, and is it just a bunch of people in a room saying, oh, I reckon we're about there, and then if you go back 3 years later, you might not have those people in that room, and then they might think something completely different. But I think the value is also in the fact that you also had to provide evidence. So we'd all come to an agreement of, yeah, we think we're about here and this is why, and it's like, okay, this policy, this practice, this thing, so you were justifying why you were actually a 3 or why you were a 4. So then when somebody does go back again and revisit that, you can say, all right, now I understand why that was chosen, because this was the evidence. So, and Lindsay made sure that she took us through that process, and we really had to think hard and fast about, well, what was the evidence that we could give? It wasn't just a gut feeling, it was, this is what our infrastructure says, and all that sort of stuff. So that justification is written into the back end, which I think is a really good thing.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Natalia. And look, to build on that, when you get your score for each one, we obviously ask you to provide a score. You have to provide the justification, and we actually catalog all of this data sources if there are policies or studies or things that are used in the justification. We also give it a confidence rating. So if you were looking at certain gaps, and you'd be able to sort based on, okay, which of these indicators do we have low confidence in? Because low confidence meant that we just didn't have any information to support them, and we didn't have broad industry agreement about what the answer was. So if you were looking for opportunities on where you might want to dig a little bit deeper, any of your indicators that were given a low level of confidence would be where you'd want to start. The medium level of confidence was that the practitioners in the room had a good feel of consensus, because tacit knowledge has its place. So we all know stuff by working in the industry, and so I think it's important to recognize that as having value. So when we all had a consensus around something, even if there wasn't a particular study that showed it, we give that a medium level of confidence because the professionals all sort of agreed in their professional opinion. But anything with a high level of confidence was something where at least one or more sources of data or justification was available. Yes?
I have a question now. It might be too early to know, but in your experience of people using, the charts that say, all right, here's a gap here, so let's work on that, and that will help us transition. Have you had people say, let's actually work in the areas where we're actually doing really well, because we may be more likely to succeed, or we're maybe more likely to really ramp that one up, and that will move us forward that way. So do you see that there is a real opportunity in actually focusing on the good areas as well as focusing on the gaps, or you think, no, you actually need to be holistic and you need to be round circle rather than being a bit of an awkward shape?
I do think we definitely need to work on, I think we do need to be holistic in our thinking, and I think that water sensitive cities is about pushing us to be more holistic and integrated in the way that we conceive of our work and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So I think we definitely need to try to at least make progress in all of the areas in some way. Now, I do think that there is value though in what you're saying around actually sometimes, it takes effort to maintain performance in certain areas. So for example, if you guys are doing really well in good water sensitive governance, and you've got good cross-institutional arrangements, you've got knowledge and skills capacity, you've got, research and funding options, you've got all sorts of really good things happening. If any of those were to drop off, then of course your score would decrease also. So I think it's about maintaining the things that are going well and building on those, rather than just saying, oh, we're not going to even bother trying to be good at ecological health, we'll just be really good at community stuff instead. I think we need to really look holistically, knowing that maybe in certain years or certain periods of time, different areas might have different levels of emphasis.
Hi, so just building on that, is it fair to say that the kind of top 3, so you've got 7 areas, the 3 around the kind of, 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock-ish, were around adaptive infrastructure, governance and community capital. And so building on, is it fair to say that those 3 are almost like means to an end? Because in themselves they don't you know, they're good things to have, but they're good things to have because they get you the other stuff. So are they more, and then the other four, are they more like the real ends that you're shooting for?
So this is a great point. So one of the things that we did through the research project was look at the different things that we wanted to measure. We wanted to measure outcomes and real on-ground state of condition-related indicators, which is I think what you're talking about. But we also wanted to recognize the management actions and the sort of policies and practices that need to be in place to actually achieve that. So for example, you could have really great ecological health just because from where your council happens to be, you have fantastic ecological values just by luck of the draw, but the way that you're managing them and the governance and community capital associated with that means that in a few years time they're going to degrade because you're not actually managing them properly. But at the moment their ecological value is very high. It could also be the other way around, in that you've got really, really poor ecological values just because of traditional ways of developing, but you've got practices and management policies in place that actually mean you're very likely to improve. So I think it's about recognizing both aspects of that, and that's something that our research team did a lot of work on. Yeah.
You show the transition pathways, the ones that dropped off. How dependent is getting there on political capital and the influence of getting that top down to actually reach the transition?
Yeah, look, I think the importance of top-down is something that is really critical. It's something that all of our sort of ground level champions talk about, and it's something that has been seen as a barrier in WA and in every other state in which we operate. When you've got those high-level champions, and we actually have, that's why one of the reasons we have indicators specifically about high-level leadership, vision, and articulated commitment, because we know that actually makes a huge difference. Is it the only thing that matters? Of course not. Can it slow things down if you don't have it? Can it speed things up if you do have it? Sure. But actually there's lots of work that's already been done even in WA before water sensitive cities thinking was really acknowledged at that high political level. So I think it's cliche to say we need both, but we need both. We do have champions that are out there doing things on ground. But I think, I've said this lots of times, I think a lot of our champions are really lonely and tired, because they're the one person in their organization that's pushing forward and the one who's always, got the water agenda, and their colleagues see them coming down the hall and go, oh God, if I make eye contact, they're going to talk to me about that water thing again. I think it's actually really hard yards to be a champion a lot of the time. So what we're trying to do is actually really support them and provide them with tools and frameworks and collateral and infrastructure that allows them to be more effective and really bring what they're doing into the broader sense of their work. And the more that we can bring those high-level people on board with that, the more it will be recognized within their organizations, and they'll have an easier time going about it.
Where do we sit at the moment, roughly?
Where do you sit at the moment?
In terms of that high-level buy-in, where does Perth? How do we rate?
Yeah, very well. Very well. I mean, considering you've got, Micro is here.
Yeah.
You've got Micro. Sue is very involved in it. Yeah. Now look, your new minister is still a mystery, right? So who knows? I couldn't possibly comment on that. But I think it's a fantastic sign the way that the Department of Water and Water Corp are working together at the state level to really embrace this agenda. They're both very active in the CRC, really embracing water sensitive cities thinking and ways of operating. The fact that Waterwise Council is looking to incorporate this in the way that it deals with council and the types of actions that it recognizes. There's a real shift, not just in what people say, but in actually the things that are being delivered and the way that work is being conceived of. I think that's very encouraging.
I'll just ask a question. You were talking about the international work, and so there are some cities that are being indexed. How does the framework stand up for different cultures, and how's that work gone?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm only a little bit involved in the developing country validation process, so I can talk about that in a limited fashion. So we have done work over in Fiji, Vietnam, I think China, in terms of benchmarking and actually validating the indicators and the ratings that we talked about for a developing context, right? Because you can imagine be quite different potentially to here. So that work is specifically around looking at how it stands up. So far it's pretty good. They need a bit more they need a bit more granularity at the lower end, understandably. So, the difference between a 1 and a 2 for them feels really big. Whereas, a lot of cities in Australia would, be up in the 3s and 4s, so it's not really an issue. So that's part of it. Another thing that actually struck me, I'm Canadian in case you didn't notice, let's talk funny. And I was home for Christmas this year, and I realized, I was like, it's like backyard skating rinks, and there's a big canal. I'm from Ottawa. There's a big canal. The largest outdoor skating rink in the world is in my hometown. At 7 kilometers of ice skating. You don't have to turn once. That's the hardest part, is turning. So you know what I mean. So we've got a lot of, but that's water infrastructure. That's means outdoor community connection and recreation, and it's water, but it's frozen. And there's things like snow melt and the types of salt and sand that are on the road in order to increase grip. But when all of that melts, of course, it goes right into our waterways. So how does snow, in the aspect of a cold climate, impact on these indicators? It's something that we haven't actually thought about. So there's room to keep testing it, to keep expanding it, and keep testing its relevance in all sorts of different contexts. And I actually did start some conversations with the Canadian Water Network around looking at how we might test it over in Canada and some other Northern Hemisphere cold climates. So yeah, there's definitely still room to improve it.
Just to add to that point, it's contextualizing the tool to the demographics and the environmental. That's, I think, important. That will be a lot more application in worldwide context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment some more on that?
No. Just adding a comment onto that. How the tool can be made more broader into in other demographics.
Yeah.
That's the example which you just said about Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course it depends. If you've got very harsh climatic conditions in any one way, right? So if you were in sort of I was going to say a desert country. We're in a desert country, but like a snowy country, versus a desert country. I'm sure Townsville at the moment might have some pretty interesting comments about the types of indicators that we're using in terms of preparedness to extreme events and other types of water-related infrastructure. So I think there's always room to improve it, and the more that we're able to test it and refine it and get it broadly applied, the more we're going to be able to make it as robust as possible.
Just identifying the indicators right to that circumstance. That's how I think, with my experience. Thank you.
Yeah, there's an interesting question though around, do you weight different indicators differently, or do you include or not include certain indicators in certain circumstances? I think there's a line to be drawn around that. It's very tough because you don't just want to say, ecological health is too hard here, so we're not going to do it. Okay, well, again, we know that we need a holistic picture. So where do you draw the line around where people can opt out or not opt out without sort of diluting the meaning and the robustness of the tool, but also making it contextually relevant? So those are trade-offs, again, that the research team is kind of working through as we go.
Okay. Thanks, Lindsay. We'll close off in a couple of minutes. Just before I do thank Lindsay, a couple of adverts for new waterways. 3 functions I want to talk to you about. First of all, the Symposium on Green Infrastructure, Roles and Responsibilities in the Delivery of Green Infrastructure in WA. So this is a partnership with the Landscape Industries Association of WA, New Waterways and the Department of Planning. So that's on Tuesday, 4th of April. So look at the website and get some information on that. The next speaker series is on Friday the 21st of April, right here, as usual. And that's about engaging communities in water-sensitive cities, getting the messaging right. And then the third one is connecting communities with water sensitivity, Community Day. And this is actually outside, Friday the 21st of April.